Excellent. All right. So, hi, Alyson. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you, Renat, for having me on your interview.
Excellent. So, welcome to Israel in a virtual way.
Thank you. I wish I was there in person.
So you actually based in New York, right?
Yes, I'm in Long Island, New York.
Excellent. So what's the weather like today in New York?
So we had been having a taste of spring this week, and then all of a sudden the weather plummeted, and they're saying there might be a little snow this afternoon. So we're in what they call the Ides of March. It can go either way, the weather. So, but we're hoping that it'll start to get warmer with every week, and this will be the last snowfall.
Excellent. I hope so. Today is actually officially the first day of the spring.
Yes, it is. So I'm looking forward to it. All the flowers are starting to push forth from the soil, so nice.
I hope you're not going to get envy, but it's about 23 degrees outside now. Well, where I live in the south of Israel, but it's about 23, 24 degrees here.
Oh,
Crazy weather like the country.
I wish I was there, that's for sure.
I don't want to swap in with you because I wish I was actually in New York now. I was there in 2008 and I fell in love.
Oh,
So I'm hoping to go back and see a little bit more of New York because I basically saw really just the tourist area. So I really want to feel a little bit more of the outside of New York.
okay. So you'll have to let me know if you come so I can be your tour guide.
Thank you. All right. Tell me, basically, I'll go through a little bit of the names of your books because from the 5 books that you published so far, 2 of them were published here in Hebrew. So basically, the first one, the name in English is the Lost Wife, which is basically here. It's called the Ava Avuda. And the other one is it's the Gardens of Letters, which is Gan HaMichtavim. That's the Hebrew version. And I've got a list of all your books. So your first one was published back in 2006, and that's the Last Van Gogh.
My first novel was published in 2000. It was called The Mask Carver's Son. I published just a few years after I graduated from university. And then my second was called Swedish Tango, and that came out in 2004. And then Last Van Gogh was 2006. And then The Lost Wife came out in 2011. And then Garden of Letters came out in 2014, all in the United States. I mean, the translations, are always at a different time.
Okay. So I saw something about there was some sort of name change of they changed something, the name of the Swedish Tango.
So my publisher for my 3 most recent books bought my 2 earliest books from different publishers, and so they're all under the same umbrella of publishers now. And when they bought Swedish Tango, their sales team wanted to rename it to something different that they thought was a bit more accessible. So it was renamed The Rhythm of Memory, but the original title was Swedish Tango.
Okay. All right. I saw some other books that were sort of published a little bit earlier, so I thought I'll check with you because I know there's sometimes I know authors publish a book and then it gets republished again they either publish it what they call the indie authors, like independent authors, and then it gets sometimes republished again under one of the publishers. Right.
These 2 books were not independently published. One was with Bloomsbury, one was with Simon & Schuster, all big publishers. But I think what happened when The Lost Wife did very well in the United States, Penguin, my publisher now, wanted to have all my titles under their umbrella, and they redid the cover and they stylized everything to sort of unify my canon of work. And it's wonderful. It's wonderful to have their support, and it's wonderful to have those books have another push after they've been kind of sleepy for so many years.
Oh, you saying sleepy? I mean, was it sort of published and it wasn't? What do you mean by sleepy? I mean,
So I would say that they were published pretty much under the radar without any sort of fanfare. You know, so much has changed in publishing now, especially with social media. I mean, for example, in 2000, when The Mask Carver's Son had come out, if you said, oh, you're going to do a virtual interview in Israel and you're going to see Renat's face and you're going to be able to talk and connect with readers on the other side of the world, I would have thought that was impossible. It would have sounded like Star Trek. But now in 2014 or 16, we're doing this. And so my books, they have become embraced in places that I never thought they would be published, and then I can connect with readers. It's so amazing. So when I meant by that they were sleepy, it meant that they had a small audience, and that, I mean, the Mask Carver's Son and The Rhythm of Memory, they did have foreign translations, but you know, I never was able to connect with my readers, you know, per se in Denmark or Germany. It's really only now with social media how easy it is to be able to discuss a book and give a whole background of stories and research that otherwise a reader on the other side of the world would never have any of that information, you know. So it's really wonderful.
It's amazing. I think that what Facebook basically did to everything, to anyone around the world. I mean, I see authors today using this tool, Facebook, as sometimes one of the main ways to publish their upcoming books and talk about books that they just released or some previous books. It's just amazing. I mean, I think authors today using Facebook and maybe also Instagram and Twitter sometimes, they basically managed to get to the best sellers list just using Facebook. I mean, obviously, I'm sure there's other ways within the United States that books get published, but I think Facebook today, I mean, all this social media, did a little bit of history, I would say. So,
and kind of it. You know, when I first was published, you would always hear, well, we're hoping word of mouth will make this book take off. But what was word of mouth in 2000 or 2005 prior to Facebook or social media? It was, you know, sitting around a dinner table and saying, what are you reading? I read a great book. But now word of mouth spreads like wildfire. I mean, if you were to put something on your Facebook that you read a book and you were up all night and this was the best book you ever read, all of your followers would listen to you. It wasn't just that person across the room from you that you're having, you know, tea and cake with. So word of mouth now, I think, is more powerful than ever with social media. So it's a fantastic thing for an author because it's about a novel, and I think to get a person to read a book, you really have to say, I love this book. Why did I love it? It touched an emotional chord with me. I was up all night, and that's the best endorsement. It's better than anything really, someone that you trust. We were talking about Goodreads, and if you have a whole group of readers that you enjoy what they read, and every recommendation that they've given to you, you really felt that it was worthwhile, that person's endorsement means a tremendous amount.
Definitely. It's amazing. I mean, I run probably one of the biggest romantic books blog here in Israel, and it's just amazing. I mean, it's basically mainly run within Facebook, but sometimes we recommend a new book that just came out by either by a local author or something that got translated. And it's just amazing how it's just, I mean, the stores today are not the only source of getting to know a new book. It's basically knowing that by the media. I mean, with your books, a lot of the readers, I know I got a few messages, but a lot of the readers actually got to know your books by our blog, and obviously as well by your Israeli publishers as well. So they also use that media as well. But it's amazing, definitely. So we have to say thank you to Mr. Zuckerberg. Yes, one of us, obviously.
I definitely thank him, and I think he's been wonderful with social media. And obviously, I thank you just for giving me this opportunity to connect with my Israeli readers. It's amazing.
Okay, excellent. I'm honored. authors that they will see this interview and get to know a little bit more than to. Most of the time you read the book and you don't really, unless it's someone here or someone local, you don't really know much about the author unless you go to their author page on Facebook, or maybe you try to communicate with them through Goodreads or something. But sometimes chatting with the author, it makes it a little bit more personal. I guess when you read the book and you actually sit down and chat with them and see what what inspired them to create the book. And so I grabbed a few questions from the readers, and I've got a few questions that I was interested to know. So hopefully we'll try to cover everything within an hour, or maybe a little bit more. We can stay all night.
It's daylight.
It's only 10 a.m. at your end, so it's fine with me.
Okay. Well, I am yours for the hour. You ask me any questions, and whatever readers are curious about, I hopefully can answer them, like their questions.
Excellent. All right. So I thought about. I mean, there's obviously the two books that got translated into Hebrew, where the Israeli audience got to know them, and obviously there's always new readers that will get to know them. But I wanted you to maybe tell us a little bit about your other books. I mean, a lot of the Israeli readers, they also read in English as well. Our English vocabulary is quite good in Israel. So a lot of people, because we don't have a lot of the romantic, let's say the romantic book variety in Israel, it's actually got the market actually grew a lot in the last year, but there's still so many books in English compared to what we have in Hebrew, either local authors or local books or other translated ones. So there's a lot of people that read in English. So I would love if you can actually tell us a little bit about the books that didn't get translated yet into Hebrew, like the last Van Gogh and the Rhythm of Memory. All those books that are yet not in Hebrew. Maybe we can inspire your publisher in Israel here to translate the other one.
Okay, well, I'm going to give you a little bit of background about how I came to writing, and then I will go into the earlier works, because I think it's a natural evolution to sort of talk about how I came to be an author. I actually was an art history and Japanese studies double major in college. I lived abroad in Japan when I was in high school, and I am the daughter of an abstract painter and an electrical engineer. And I like to give a little background of just about where I came from, my life experiences, because all of those experiences and even how I was raised by a very artistic mother and a very scientific father.
It's an interesting combination, an artist and an engineer.
Interesting combination, and I think it really explains, why I became a novelist when I give you, the answer to this. But from a very early age, my mother, the artist, really taught me to see the world through what I always describe as an artistic lens. And I think all of my novels, from The Mask Carver's Son, the first one, to the most recent one, which will be The Velvet Hours, that comes out in September, I love recreating a world for my readers in which you can see everything, taste everything, feel everything. It's very sensory rich. And I really feel that every chapter that I am creating is like a mini canvas. And the sentences that I, apply to this canvas really move you like brushstrokes through the story. And I approach every novel as if I'm recreating a world from that first sentence to the last, and that you're stepping into it really like a painting. So my father, the engineer, what he always sort of talked to me about was how you could never really understand something unless you took it apart and put it back together again. And more than being a writer that talks about love and emotion, I also feel that I'm a historical novelist, and that all of my novels, by the time you finish them, you learn something about a period in history that you might not be aware of before you actually started reading the novel. And so all those little components of research that go into writing a historical novel are like pieces of a puzzle. And I have to somehow figure out a way in which I can weave them into the story, but not that they're so, the word in English is didactic, where you feel like you're constantly being taught something, but that it's a seamless experience of living in a world, and through osmosis you get to learn something. And so my first novel, which was The Masked Carver's Son, its genesis happened when I was a junior in college. That's our third year in college. I spent another year in Japan because I wanted to perfect my Japanese language skills. And because from both my parents, you know, I was drawn to the arts, but I was also drawn to learning something that I might not know otherwise. I apprenticed myself to a Japanese mask carver of ancient masks in Kyoto. So for 4 hours a day for 9 months, I worked on carving a single mask that was used for the Japanese theater. And I was one of 3 apprentices to a man named Iwasaki Koen. He was an 85-year-old carver. He was considered a national treasure in Japan because he had trained to make these masks that were used in the theater. And as I was carving these masks, I thought to myself, here I am, a Western woman studying a traditional Japanese art form. When did the reverse occur? When did the Japanese start studying European art? And from that question, I started thinking about, wouldn't it be interesting to create a novel in which you have a young Japanese artist who's drawn to painting in the European style, and forsakes everything in his family and the destiny that he's supposed to fulfill of following in his father's footsteps, and he goes to Paris at the turn of the century. And it becomes this novel about outsidership, but also about how a young artist who is born in an artistic family has desires that are very different from his family's, and that he goes and he experiences Japan, but always from the outside. I mean, it's interesting because I reversed my own experience. When I was living in Japan, even though I spoke fluent Japanese, look at me, I mean, everyone knew I wasn't Japanese. And what happens when you're drawn to a culture, but from the moment that you open your mouth, people know that you're different. I mean, even before you open your mouth, when they look at you. So I reversed that equation and wrote that novel. That was my first one. Then my second novel, The Rhythm of Memory, which was Swedish Tango, I was living in Sweden for a little bit after college, and I met someone whose family had immigrated to Sweden after the Pinochet coup in Chile. And he said to me over dinner, when I first arrived, my mother couldn't listen to the sound of music. And I said, why? I didn't understand, you know, why someone wouldn't be able to listen to something that every one of us associate with being beautiful. And he started to explain that when his mother had been incarcerated as being a political prisoner in Chile, that they had piped in classical music into the cells so that other prisoners couldn't hear the painful interrogation that was going on. And that question became, how does someone heal after something terrible has happened to them? And how does one deal with a painful association that everyone else thinks of as being beautiful and cathartic, but it's the inverse for this particular character? And that novel is really written as a dance between these 4 characters, everyone in Sweden who is not actually Swedish. They're all immigrants who come to the country, and how they overlap and their different experiences. And then The Last Van Gogh, I was really drawn to Vincent's last 70 days in Auvers-sur-Oise, where he went after he cut off his ear in Arles, and he had been in the sanitarium in Saint-Remy. There had been a very interesting relationship between Dr. Gachet, the last doctor who treated Vincent, and how he was able to produce 70 paintings in 70 days really mystified me. I knew that something, was happening in those days where Vincent was his most frenetic, creating his artwork, and the letters sort of alluded to the fact that Dr. Gachet might have been giving him homeopathic treatments that were increasing his frenetic, ability to produce. And I was very intrigued by the relationship between Vincent and Dr. Gachet's daughter, Marguerite Gachet, who was Vincent's last muse. He did 2 paintings of her. There was a letter where he mentioned a 3rd painting that he hoped to do of her. And so from those, questions, every novel has a question that initiates my research and my intellectual curiosity, and I start building from that. But I know you were curious about the romantic aspect. I mean, I think every novel, maybe not The Mask Carver's Son, that's definitely my least romantic novel, but every novel has a window to open up to show how the heart communicates and the challenges of the heart in a lifetime. And one of the things that really, I think you'll find in a lot of my later work, certainly in Lost Love, The Lost Wife in Hebrew, and also The Garden of Letters, is that in a lifetime, we often have more than one love, and there are different shades of love. And you can have love between friends and family, but then your first love is often very different than the love you might have later in life, should you have lost that love. So these shades, these gradations of how we experience love and loss and suffering and rebirth and redemption really fascinate me, because I think you're looking at a life not from a two-dimensional, oh, this was just my only love, my first love, but it becomes spherical, in which you're changing and the light is shifting and the shadows are often there. And how does one experience those different feelings and emotions in a lifetime?
Definitely. I think that's actually what makes, I mean, my taste in books. I think I like books that are more like, obviously there's a love story within them, but you also see the love you have sort of around them, like, you know, love between, you know, either a brother and a sister, or two sisters, or brother and a brother, you know, the love you have with your family, and the sort of love you have with, you know, with other people that, you know, not your family, or your lover, or, you know, your husband, wife, or anything like that. So I think that's sort of, it's interesting to see that, to read that. It's interesting to see the way authors are able to you know, to describe it, and to, you know, to basically put it into a story. It's the thing that's what I think makes books interesting,
right,
for my liking. So
I mean, I definitely obviously share your sensibility. For me, writing, I don't know, should I refer to The Lost Wife as Lost Wife or Lost Love? Like, I don't know with this, how do you say this in Hebrew?
Yeah, well, you can say The Lost Wife. Like, the Lost Wife is the English name, and the Lost Love is the Hebrew translation. So I think that they probably will understand.
Okay, The Lost Wife. So when I was writing The Lost Wife, this novel really, the big arc is about a couple that is separated during World War II. He believes that she perished in a concentration camp, and she believes that he actually, leaving for America, died in a shipwreck. And so during the course of 67 years, you find out how they each literally, not just physically survived, but emotionally survived. And so they each also, thinking the other person had died, remarry. And writing the marriages that they experienced, thinking that the other person had died, was very interesting to me, because those loves, and it's the same with Garden of Letters, when Elodie arrives and Angelo takes care of her and she's lost her first love, those second loves are born out of sadness, and they're born out of a haunting of the other person who has perished. But those second loves are really quite beautiful too, because they breathe life into the other person and enable them to have a second life, and to, I don't want to use the word endure because it makes it seem almost too hard, but to experience life still, not to give up. And so it is this sense of breathing life into the person. But they also have far more grays and more subtleties than a very naive first love, where you just think this person is going to be the person I spend the rest of my life to, and that's the first person who makes me feel alive. There's this dialectic of shadow and light right away that are born from the second love. And so for me, writing that, it makes it a more soulful experience to write about, because there is sorrow. And you know, I know it's been said that you can't experience happiness truly unless you know what it's like also to be sad. So that constant contrast of light and dark, sadness and happiness, it's fascinating to me. And I think it's also because I come from this artistic mother who, you know, was always talking about, you know, this chiaroscuro in life, this shadow and light. And it's interesting to explore from every different angle. I could do it with every book because it makes it more interesting.
Definitely, definitely. A lot of your books are actually more of the sort of the historical, like the sort of more like historical books. They sort of talk about you know, the things that happen in the past. I mean, is it something that you enjoy more writing about, like the history, or is it something? I mean, it's not. You see that some authors that write some history, some sort of contemporary romance, but with most of your books, it's more of the historical books. There are more, you know, things of the past.
Yes, all of them are historical. They will always be historical.
I had a look at Goodreads before, but you know, sometimes Goodreads is not that accurate. So when you've got the actual source sitting in front of you, better to ask.
Yes. So the reason that I'm drawn to historical novelists and writing historical fiction is because I need to feel at the end of the day when I finish writing a novel that I myself have learned something. So I always pick a subject that I know nothing about because I want to learn, I want to do the research, and it's extremely intellectually satisfying to know that I haven't just created a novel at the end of the day, but I've learned something myself. So for example, in The Lost Wife, as you could hear me talk about the other books that preceded it, all of my novels begin with a question that I don't know the answer to. And when that question continues to nag me in my mind, I realize I have to find the answer to the question. I have to create a novel around it. So with The Lost Wife, that question was, could art be created in the most horrific circumstances? If you took everything away from an artist, would they still find the means to create? And that question came to me really after I had my second child, and I was trying to figure out how I was still going to maintain my life as a writer and my creative, work. And it was very challenging. I had 2 children under the age of 3, and I thought to myself, surely people have had it much worse than you. And how did they find a way to, to maintain their creative spirit? And so for, I was young at the time, Jewish woman, I thought, well, how did the artists of the Holocaust, did they still find the means to create? And I didn't know the answer to it. And I started doing research just to sort of answer the question in my mind. And I came across this article about a Czech artist by the name of Dina Gottliebova, who had, when she arrived in Auschwitz, she was approached by an artist that she knew from art school back in Prague, who had gathered clandestine supplies and said to her, would you create a mural for the children in the children's barracks? And she, at great risk to herself, agreed to do this mural. She decided to do a mural for the children of Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs because that was the last movie she saw before she was deported. She was first deported to Terezin, and then she went on to Auschwitz. And so using this stolen paint, she created this image of Snow White against a mountainscape with some of the dwarves, so that when the children woke up every day, they saw something that transported them even for a few seconds. And so that gave me the first bit of information that someone had created something. The article went on further to describe how Dr. Mengele was looking for an artist to document his horrific studies he was doing on the gypsies, and he called her into his office and said, if you agree to do watercolors of the gypsies for me, I will spare you your life. And she said, my life is worth nothing unless you spare my mother's as well. And he agreed, and that's how she and her mother survived Auschwitz. And so that bit of the information gave me another thing to think about, which was that sometimes artistic skill was valued by the Nazis to such an extent that enabled an artist to survive, to physically survive, not just emotionally, because they were doing something to sustain their spirit. And then I also had a name, and so I was able to start building my character of Lenka in The Lost Wife from that initial bit of information. I was able to go to the Holocaust Museum in DC and then later to Prague to interview artists who worked in Terezin and Auschwitz. But the funny part is that even though I was 6 months into researching this, and this was the intellectual curiosity that sparked the book, and I knew I wanted to create a character who survived and somehow maintained her artistic spirit through all this darkness and all this horror, my agent called to check in and say, well, you know, what are you working on? And I said, well, my next book is going to be a book about how an artist survives the Holocaust through her artistic skill. And she said, she was just quiet on the phone. And I said, don't you think it's a great idea? And she said, Alyson, you always pick these very esoteric periods in history to write about. And I just think this is going to be an impossible book to sell. And she just was not particularly enthusiastic about a book that took that angle. And I, at that time, had a babysitter once a week so that I could get work done. And so I was paying, you know, $15 an hour to research and to start reading, to start, you know, thinking of the book. And I hung up the phone with my agent, very frustrated. And I decided I would just go to the local hair salon to get my hair cut, because at that time, really, my husband used to joke around that when he'd come home from work, it looked like I had just escaped from prison. I would come down with like 2 kids and just like throw them at him and say, I just want to take a shower. So, you know, I thought, well, what am I going to do with my time now? I should just at least, you know, make myself slightly presentable. So I get to the hair salon, and it's a local place where you don't need an appointment, and a lot of, you know, older people frequent it. It has the thing over the head and the rollers in the hair. But I love the woman who cuts my hair. And I sat down, and I wasn't in the mood to have a conversation with her, because my mind was constantly thinking about what I had just spoken about with my agent and how she didn't think it was a very good idea. And all of a sudden, out of like the corner of my right ear, I hear the stylist next to me telling this story about how a client had been in the day before, who had gone to this wedding, where at the rehearsal dinner the evening before, the bride's grandmother and the groom's grandfather were meeting for the first time. And throughout the evening, the groom's grandfather kept on saying to the bride's grandmother, I know you from somewhere. I know you from somewhere. And she was trying to focus on the festivities around her and not pay him too much attention. And at the end of the evening, he said to me, will you please roll up your sleeve? And she agreed to do this. And when she rolled up her sleeve, he saw the 6-number tattoo of Auschwitz inked into her skin. And he looked at her, this time even more, you know, focused, and he said, you were my wife. And I heard that story, and I thought, what? How can that be? You know, how could they have been married? Why had they become separated? Well, you know, and later I learned from this person telling the story that they each had thought each other had perished and married other people, and then their grandchildren had met and fallen in love, and they were reunited at this wedding. But I can write a whole novel around one question. Here the question was, you know, what was their initial love story? How did they become separated? Who were their second loves that they obviously married because they obviously had children and grandchildren? And then more importantly, how did they survive? And so from all of those questions, The Lost Wife was born. And I decided to create the novel as, you know, under the composition of a full circle, that it would be like the Jewish wedding band, that the first love is the last love is the first love. And the novel begins at that wedding. I'm not giving anything away. That's the first chapter. The last line of the first chapter is, you were my wife. And then it flips into Prague 1938, and you learn how they fell in love and what happened and what happens when the war begins. All of my intellectual curiosity of how an artist survives during the Holocaust is still maintained in the book. I create the character of the lost wife as being an artist who's in art school, very much like Dina Gottliebova, how she actually appears in the book, and her mural appears in the book. But so I combine those two elements, the history, the interest in how an artist experienced the Holocaust, but it's framed by this sense of two people separated, thinking each other had died, and then learning what happens in the course of their lifetime with their second loves, you know, and what happens with them. So it's to me, that was an amazing Beshert moment, because had I not had that conversation, had I not gotten my hair cut, the novel would never have, I think, had the life that it came to have, because I draw the reader in by the love story, because you want to know how, you know, they got separated, and luckily you know that they are reunited right from the beginning. But I also maintain my intellectual integrity of what fascinated me to begin with.
Wow, I'm speechless. It's amazing. I mean, how the first thing I was thinking, how, I mean, obviously it's been like 50 years or something, probably from the time they got separated from, you know, the time of the concentration camps to probably they're about 70, 80 or something.
Yes, in their 80s.
How you not recognize, you don't, I mean, it's someone you used to love and you used to be married to that person, and now he obviously remembered something, but she couldn't recognize him. It's wow.
That's a great question, Ronat, because it's something that I really pondered before I started writing the book. Why does he recognize her, but she does not recognize him? And when I came to the conclusion, at least in how I write the story, is that he never ever gives up hope that he might see her again. Like, he's haunted by the fact that he left her in Prague thinking he could get her to America. He goes before with his family. And so his character is written that he's always haunted by her memory. He's on a subway and he sees the back of a hair, and it triggers something that it reminds him of her. He eats a strawberry. He remembers the central experience of eating strawberries with him as young 20-something-year-olds in the countryside. But because she endures the Holocaust, her whole life has these sort of shut windows. So when she hears he dies, she shuts that off. When she gets to Razin, she has to endure, and she lives in a very different way, where she doesn't think backwards, she has to think forwards. Whereas he's haunted, and he's constantly thinking in the back. He's constantly haunted by his memories. So I think he sees her because his mind is open to the possibility that she could still exist. The screenwriter who's worked on the script for the movie, because it's in development for a film, he said he always compared the character of Joseph, the man who she's married to, as someone who has a kidnapped child who never knows what happened to her. Just believes that she lives continually as a young person in his mind, whereas she's a survivor, someone who has lost her whole family, and so how she endures is very different. So those different shades which fascinate me are woven into the book. But it was an incredible story that added a whole other layer to my original idea.
It's amazing. I think sort of if you look at where life takes you. I mean, taking the Holocaust and the amazing stories you hear sometimes, about people who got separated and reunited again after like 40, 50 years. And then you sort of take your story about, how you went to Prague to do your research, and your agent called and she wasn't really happy about it. And then you went to your hair salon, and then you heard a conversation. It's just amazing how, I'm learning a little bit. When you said all this story, it kind of connects a little bit. I'm learning a little bit of Kabbalah.
Oh, okay.
Yes, very fascinating. And the one thing that they keep on saying, they're sort of, I would probably call it like their mantra. It's something that, life sort of takes you wherever, it kind of takes you to whatever. You sometimes walk together with life, but sometimes life will sort of take you to places, and it will. You sort of meet people along the way, or other. If you take for instance your agent, the conversation sort of took you to the hair salon, and then in the hair salon you heard this conversation and the story, and then it's sort of it's amazing because look what happened today. You wrote a book that's been so successful and been translated to so many languages, and it's been actually it's going to be a movie. So it's just amazing. It's just how it's all connected. And
I couldn't agree with you more. And I feel as I get older, these sort of coincidence that I think have a greater impact on your life are happening more and more to me. And I don't know if it's because I'm opening myself up to be accessible to the more experiences. But for example, this is something, I mean, with this book, The Lost Wife, so many incredible, I call them miracles, but really special, profound experiences have come out.
You can use the word miracle.
Okay, miracle. So let me tell you, so when I started doing the research for The Lost Wife, I started listening to all sorts of oral histories through the Shoah Foundation in the United States Holocaust Museum that they have on file. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but Steven Spielberg funded a whole initiative that every survivor who wanted to tell their story, it's on a video archive. So I went down to start listening to artists who were in Terezin or in Auschwitz to listen to their experiences. And it was actually Dina Galibova, the woman who did the mural, when she talked about her time in Terezin, she said that when she heard Carl Froelich play the violin, she said, I was transported to someplace else for 15 minutes a day because his music was so beautiful. And so I made a sort of personal vow to myself that any person who was mentioned in the book, I would use their real name. So I have my character Lenka say in Terezin, when I heard Carl Froelich play the violin, and I describe him playing the violin at night, and I just assumed, that this experience transformed many people to someplace more beautiful than where they were. It was important to weave into the novel, but I assumed he died because I just assumed that. I assumed, 95% of the people who were mentioned in anyone's oral history perished in the Shoah. So about a year after The Lost Wife came out, I got an email through my website from someone who said she had been given the book by a friend and that her father was in the book. And she said, my father was Carl Froelich, the violinist you mentioned, and I want you to know that he survived the war. He married my mother, a French pianist, and I myself played the cello. And she, of course, thanked me for putting him in the book and said she was very moved to see him there. And I had just begun The Garden of Letters, and my main character, Elodie, is a cellist. And I said, this is literally, I had started working on it 2 weeks ago, and I was thinking, I need to meet a cellist so I can start, learning about how they're drawn to the instrument. And so I had the opportunity to meet her and not only talk about, my research and who had mentioned her father and why it was so important to have him in the book, but also she told me her whole history of being drawn to the cello, what, music she played, how she picked out her cello, my character has a father who's a violinist in The Garden of Letters, and what that relationship was with her father. All these small details about how she wrapped her cello in a scarf, and and how she embraced her cello and the sensual sort of movements of a cellist. All of that came from her. So it was like one book became knitted into the other from that experience. And it was, later I was able to meet with her daughter, her sister, who was a ballerina, and now I'm working on a book about a ballerina. And so all these things, it's wonderful, the connections you meet along the way. And had I not put that name, that wouldn't have, opened up. So there were it happened many times over in The Lost Wife where I put people's names, and people contacted me saying, you've mentioned my great uncle, and do you have any more information about him? And I would remember where I got the information. I would be able to provide that from them. And so that book, more than any other, forged all these personal connections, I think, also because people who have lost members in the Holocaust are always searching for more information. And so it's wonderful to know that, yes, this is a love story and a very romantic one, but also one that has the possibility to make these smaller connections.
Definitely. I think you have the most amazing job ever.
I think so. I love it. The thing is, we don't know with each book what life it will have. It's like giving birth, where you think, I bring this child into the world, but I don't know what they will accomplish or how they will succeed or how they will suffer. I mean, every book has a life of its own that you cannot anticipate. You can just produce it because you believe in the story and you're fascinated with it, or you hope that you're creating characters that people forge an emotional connection with, but you don't know, you don't know how it's going to be received. You don't know what life will have.
It's like going on a sort of like a trip, and you don't know what places you're going to see, or which people you're going to meet, and it's like when you finish the trip, you're telling the whole story, but that's sort of like it's like creating the story. It's like going sort of that's the way I sort of see it. It's like going on a trip, but it's just amazing how you basically take every sort of idea that comes up. Either you talk to people or you hear conversation, and you really you're doing quite a big research about it. I mean, I guess it's sort of a combination between research and things that sort of come up in your imagination and obviously your talent, your talent in writing, and that's sort of that's quite interesting. I mean, that's something I always I find it quite interesting to know in the life of authors. I mean, do you sort of you sit down and you just write, or you just sort of the muse is coming in every possible hours of the day, and you just go, okay, I have to sit down and write it. I mean, how does it work for you?
How do I describe the material? I mean, how do I describe the process? Well, I would say that I feel that I'm almost constantly living two lives at the same time. And so I have part of my head constantly thinking of a book and the characters and that world. But then I'm a mother of two children. Now they're, 9 and 12. And I have to be present for them and to do all the, things that are my responsibilities. So I feel when I'm not writing, I still am writing, but I'm holding the ideas in my head so that when I have time to sit down, which I always write when they're in school, everything comes out. And so I've become a much more efficient writer than I was before I had children, where I just was actually quite spoiled. And I thought, I sit down and I have time to write. And then if the muse hits me at, 4:00 p.m., I can still write. But now at 4 p.m., I'm probably driving my son to baseball practice. So I try and still maintain the life of the novel in my head, but I have to just hold it almost like a juggler holding the ball until I have time to catch it and write it. But I do write every day, except when I'm traveling for book tour, because I think it's some work at every day and refine. I begin every day by rewriting what I wrote the day before. Part of that is just to get back into the world and the rhythm of the language, but I feel I have to rewrite or delete just as much as I write and sort of apply. So I always describe this metaphor of the painter with the palette knife. Like you put the brush strokes on, but then you have to carve out where the light's going to hit, because you don't want to have too much of this impasto, these thick brush strokes. And this metaphor for the painting is very true to my writing, because I don't just think of where I'm applying the strokes and where I'm carving out the light, but I'm also thinking of this contrast between negative and positive space, meaning, positive space in a painting is where you apply the brushstroke, and the negative space is the space around that you let just be the white of the page. And in The Lost Wife, I was very conscious of what part of the story I was going to tell and what part of the story I wasn't going to tell, that there are things that you have to sort of breathe around and you fill in. And that movement to me is very interesting. Sometimes what is not said is almost more profound than what is said. And for example, when I covered Auschwitz, I didn't feel the need to describe every detail of what happened there, because I was working with the knowledge that most people know about what happened in Auschwitz, but they don't know what happened in Terezin and the artistic resistance or the experience there and what happened there. And so there's much more saturation of description there. I also very much wanted to use language and descriptive language as a metaphor. So when I would interview survivors, what I noticed was that there was always this rhythm of how they told the story. They would begin by creating a very safe place, which was their childhood, and there they could describe the rituals of their childhood. Whether it was something like ice skating with their sister or having hot chocolate with their mother, but those descriptions were beautiful and painless for them. But as the war escalated and things started being stripped away from them, the language that they used was always more sparse, increasingly sparser. And then by the end, when it was the most painful thing, with discussion of how, experiencing almost their entire families being extinguished, the language became almost skeletal. It was so bare bones, then this happened and this happened. There was no descriptive language. So the entire Lost Wife is written with that rhythm of the very beginning in Prague, with the red apartment and the cut crystal, and life was good and beautiful. But then during the deportation, you start to feel the colors and textures change. You feel then from red velvet, you go to the sparse, the wood of the barracks, the dirt underneath your feet. And then in Auschwitz, the language is very skeletal. There's no adjectives, there's no unnecessary embellishment. Because I wanted you to feel the descent through color and texture the way you would as if you were moving through a painting. So for me, I guess the layers are the initial question that intrigues me to the book, the research, how the heart experiences the story, but also the reflection of the story through color and texture. And to me, every layer of how I do that is fascinating for me. The experience of creating that so that at the end you have this full experience reading the novel. And as we mentioned before, but you also learn about something. You learn about the artistic experience. You learn about the sinking of the Athenia, this boat that left from Poland, stopping off in London to North America. Things that you might not know along the way. So, hopefully it's like one-stop shopping.
But it's just beautiful how you describe it, like how you write a book almost the same way that a painter will paint something. It's something that I've heard a few times about writers and painters have sort of like almost like a parallel world in a way, the way they create their books. It just I think obviously it's both art. I mean, this is the art of painting, and this is the art of, I would say, the art of words.
Right.
And
I think touching also on how you said, how is my process? How do I do that? Am I living in two worlds? I am living in two worlds in which there's this story and then there's my real life. But I think you also start feeling, especially as I get older and I have more life experiences, and certainly my experience with my children, that those experiences go into your work in a way that you won't see in my earlier week. I mean, I think I wrote less about love when I was a young 20-something-year-old novelist than I do as I'm 43 now, because I've experienced love, as well we discussed, in so many different forms. I mean, I'm right now experiencing love in the sense that I look at my parents and they're aging and I feel their vulnerability, and I feel like I shouldn't be so sharp with them and I should be more compassionate with them because I see them, more fragile. And so I know that that's going to be in my, my next book. Whereas with The Lost Wife, I, did have these two children under the age of 4 at the time. And I know there are scenes in that book where my character has a child and she sees in her child the expressions of her mother and the smile of her father who have perished. And she looks at them and she says to herself, I realize that, that your ancestors still live within the next, generation, that you still see that. And I could not have made that connection if I hadn't looked at my daughter and said, oh my God, she has my mother's smile or my father's eyes, and realizing I found that incredibly profound. But what if you had lost your family and all of a sudden in your child, you're starting to see that they still live? So it was a perfect storm of experiencing young motherhood and all those vicissitudes that happen with being a mother, wanting to protect your child, to seeing your family and their genes, to worrying of what they will, what will happen to them, to put that in the book. And so I think if you read a novelist's work from, when they're young until hopefully until I'm 90, all their things that they experience start going into that, and it adds another dimension to it. Like I could not have written The Lost Wife had I not been at that time in my life experiencing these things, because it all went into it like a full, kettle pot of, what you were cooking at the time.
It's quite beautiful to see, like, reading a book by an author when he was around his 20, and reading a book now when he's, almost at his 40s, and you obviously see how things change, how he actually mature.
Yeah.
Basically,
yes.
you can see that, obviously, like you said, more experience, and something about the writing is a little bit more, like you see that they've grown up a little bit. Something with the way they write is different. I think if you sort of, there's one author here in Israel, I read his book when I was 16, and he still writes books today when I'm 20 years later, and you can see how it's obviously it's so different. I mean, I'm also 20 years older, so I see things a little bit different, but it's just it's just amazing how it's like it's just more than just words. There's so much beyond that.
Yes.
And that sort of
experience, I think. And I noticed, if you were to look at The Mask Carver's Son and you were to look at The Lost Wife, I can objectively say in The Mask Carver's Son, there was so much description. I felt like 5 sentences to say one thing. And now with Lost Wife, I really wanted to find this one sentence chiseled down to says that exact thing. and then I look at my life and I think I want, you know, less possessions. I want less clothes in my closet. I just want the perfect, simple, you know, there's so much beauty and simplicity that I don't think you appreciate when you're younger. And it's the emotion that is more fascinating to me than, you know, just describing everything, I think. Because maybe I feel more.
Yeah, there's definitely, I think it's just beautiful to see how, you know, we think in a different way that we think a couple of years later, you know, and it's obviously as an author you can actually, you know, you can see it within the words that you write.
Yes. And I also think, just adding to this, that when you're younger, you really believe in life that there is one great love waiting for you, and that great love is going to fulfill everything. I mean, we're sort of, you know, engineered to believe that. But then when you become older, you realize that in a life, that's an impossible expectation, that one person can fill you in all those different ways, and that a mind and a soul have, I mean, all sorts of different facets and angles. And so writing a story about how someone loses their first love and yet finds another love and yet has sadness in their life and will always have certain sadness, but also still able to love, is a much more complex idea that I think a 20-something-year-old could ever understand. But a 43-year-old, you know, I have friends who've lost their husbands at 38, you know, or have suffered disease or all sorts of things that happen as you get older that makes life have these downs and these highs and these shadows and, you know, also these great starbursts of light. And it's something I think that an older soul is drawn to, because we're experiencing it. Not that you're old, but
we're just not sure.
Kind
of. So when did you you were talking about, you know, how you're different from the time you start writing at the age of 20, and you have things a little bit different for you today, almost like 20 years later. When was the first time that is writing was something that you remember doing as you know, as a child, or, you know, was it something that your life, you know, your world was sort of always surrounded by sort of like characters in your mind, or is it sort of something that developed a little bit, you know, a little bit later in life?
Well, it's a great question. I always loved reading and I always loved writing, but my first love was painting. I wanted to be an artist like my mother. But my mother really didn't encourage me to be an artist. She thought that the life of an artist was very impractical, and that she worried that I wouldn't be able to support myself. And I did well in school, so I think she thought, well, you know, you're articulate and maybe you could do something that has a bit more stability. When I went to college, I really thought that I was going to major in fine arts, and then I took an art history class. And art history opened up a whole other world to me, because it was a way in which I could learn about art, but I could also be a storyteller, because when you're writing art history papers, you're looking at a painting, you're putting it in historical context, but you're also exploring the psychological relationship between the painter and the subject. You're looking for clues in all sorts of ways about what is being conveyed in the painting. And all of my teachers said, wow, you have this great gift for telling the story behind the painting. And, you know, people would say to me, what are you going to do with your art history degree? And I didn't know what I was going to do. But when I got to the, you know, my senior year, I thought if I could do anything in the world, what I would love to do would be to tell stories about artists and the artistic experience. And so I applied for a grant after I graduated, because I wanted to research kind of what we talked about before, which was how did a Japanese artist experience Impressionist France at the turn of the century. And I did get that grant. It was called a Thomas J. Watson Fellowship. And during that year abroad, I got to travel to Kyoto and to Paris and even Italy. And I started working on the novel. And then I got the book published, and I've been writing ever since. But it all came about from this idea of how can I fuse together my two passions, which is art and history and writing of brief, you know, interests. And I somehow have managed with every book to create a novel that has some sort of artistic theme. And, you know, I've branched out not just to do painting now, I mean, but also, you know, The Rhythm of Memory, which is Swedish tango, deals with an actor. I did a short story about a ballerina in Grand Central, that anthology. And I'm working now on a book also about a ballet dancer. Garden of Letters deals with a cellist with music, and The Lost Wife deals with an artist. So every book has some sort of artistic element that I'm trying to explore from that character's point of view. I'm putting them usually against a backdrop, which is some sort of very challenging landscape, whether it's being an immigrant against a foreign landscape, or whether it's the Holocaust, or if it's World War II Italy with the Garden of Letters. There's always something historic playing in the background.
Wow. It's beautiful how you manage to, you know, to combine everything together, like art, history, and writing, and you sort of, you know, you manage to bring all these books to life. It's just, you know, it's like you sort of you accomplish your, you know, what your what's the word for that? You're like your destiny, what you're destined to do on this earth. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's just,
I feel that, and every day I think if I were to die tomorrow, I have left behind something of myself that I feel is beautiful. I want to make the world a more beautiful place, and I realize that there is so much sadness and suffering, but where do you find light within that darkness is something that really fascinates me, and to leave a legacy of books behind is a wonderful thing, and to know that I'm being, you know, read in Israel or Macedonia or Serbia, it's like I can't even believe it. It's amazing to me. I'm very grateful.
yeah, no, definitely, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. So basically, that's I mean, is there anything? I'm hoping I've sort of managed to cover, you know, everything. I always feel like I didn't ask enough questions, and then I look at the interview later on, I think, oh my God, we were chatting for so long. But is there anything else you know you want to say, or you want to maybe say to the you know, to the Israeli readers?
I just want to express my gratitude truly, because I'm very grateful that my stories are being read in your country, and I hope that they resonate with the Israeli readers, and I hope that it's some, you know, my stories, you know, continue to enthrall and to, you know, move you, and that they resonate with your heart. I mean, that's all I can really hope for, and I'm just grateful for you, Renat, for giving me this opportunity to give a little background, because I think, you know, before social media, when a writer wrote a book, that was all that they said. You know, you didn't know anything, you know, behind that, and so now you can read my novels and realize, oh, this is where the artistry comes from her mother, or from, you know, the mechanics of the book, or from her father, or that she, you know, all these different things that come into the different layers of writing a novel. You now know at least a little bit of my backstory.
And it's truly amazing. I'm not just saying that, but you just, you know, I'm sitting here and I'm just fascinated. You know, I'm learning so much about you know, how sort of, you know, what's the background, what's the, you know, behind, you know, like you're watching a show, but you don't know really what happened before that, how was the rehearsal, and you know, who are the people that, you know, playing all the different roles, and it just, you know, I'm truly fascinated here. It's just it's amazing. So you're truly an inspirational person.
Oh, well, you are too, and thank you for doing this so that I can, you know, connect with the Israeli readers. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be able to have this dialogue. It's a very intimate dialogue. I think you've gotten a chance to see what's inside my head, which is really the most intimate, you know, experience ever, I think, to understand how someone's mind works. So, thank you.
And I would also want to thank basically a publisher in Israel is they call Pen Publishing,
Yes.
which is sort of like it's one of the publishers here that it's sort of there's another big publishers called Yediot, which is one of the largest publishers. It's sort of like I would probably compare them. If they'll see this interview, I'm sure they will happy to hear it. But they sort of, I would probably compare them to Penguin or Simon and Schuster. Simon and Schuster. Sort of, they're the largest one, and I think Penn are sort of one of their sort of publishers here. So I would probably would like to thank them as well, because they sort of did a little bit of the behind the scenes with this interview. So thank you to them as well.
For them as well.
Sorry?
I said I'm very thankful for them as well for arranging it.
Excellent. And thank you very much, Alyson. I had a truly amazing an hour and a half. To be honest, I didn't know what to expect, and I felt a little bit uncomfortable that I ran out of time, and I was like, oh my God, I have to manage to read at least one of the books, and sort of everything just went wrong on Saturday. So I was like, right, I'll do this interview. I'm sure it's going to be fine. We'll talk about everything that we can. And now I'm actually a little bit, I think it's actually a little bit more interesting to go and read The Lost Wife and the Garden of Letters now that I know all the background, it's going to be a little bit more, I think more interesting.
No, I agree. I mean, I know when I speak about the books to an audience where some of the people haven't read it before, people say, like, I'm so happy I have that background to go into the story. So I think it'll be a much more fulfilling experience, and now you know the different layers of the novel.
Definitely. It's sort of like the difference between it's like watching a movie in 2D and then watching it in 3D. It's sort of you sort of it's a little bit more, you get a little bit more, it's because most of the books that I read are just I get recommendations, or I go into Goodreads and I read the book and that's about it, and I don't really know what inspired the author and what made them write these books. So sometimes obviously starting a book after you actually spoke to the author makes it a little bit more colorful than just reading a book.
Yeah, it's multidimensional, I think, when you've gotten the background of the author and what their experiences and what research they did. I think it's good. So don't feel guilty. Feel blessed that you now know more.
Excellent. Definitely. So we hope to see you here in Israel. Obviously, if you want to come, the best time to come is around the summertime. Okay. And I hope to be in New York anytime soon.
So we'd get together and we'll
definitely. You're more than welcome to come here to Israel to come and visit the South. And hopefully maybe we can catch up in New York. I'll send this interview to one of my best friends lives in New York, so and he keeps on nagging me to come over, and I said, you don't have to convince me. I'm already convinced. Just need to find the time and the money, and I'm going there. So definitely. So thank you so much, Alyson. It's been a wonderful time, and I'm glad this interview just came up to be like that, and not what I was sort of a little bit afraid. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, and hopefully see you again soon.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Have a rest of a great rest of the day.
You too, and have a wonderful evening. Bye, Renan.
Bye. Thank you.